Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and family, and everybody else, it's such a great pleasure to be with you today on the first episode of Season 4 of Real Talk with Billy and Cory, live from the Marstar Center sound booth in Blacksburg, Virginia, home of Virginia Tech's campus. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy New Year 2020. I'm Hot Take Billy Parvatam on hand, joined by my podcast partner, Uncle Cornelius Michael. Some people call him Cory Van Dyke. Cory, it's great to be back with you for 2020.
It is great to be back in Blacksburg, back here at Virginia Tech. I'm starting my spring semester of my senior year. You've, of course, already graduated. Big shout over here. But exciting times for me, in this last semester as an undergrad. So looking forward to it.
For sure, Cory's taking his victory lap this semester, as they say. But so much has happened since we last spoke on the air. Of course, with our podcast, we had the college football playoff. LSU is now the national champion. We've got the Super Bowl matchup next week with the Chiefs and the 49ers. We'll go into the specific matchup a little bit more next week, of course, leading up to the game. And Virginia Tech's lots been happening around here as well, specifically. But we're going to start today with, of course, our favorite sport, baseball, but the scandal that's really hit all of sports, and that's in regards to the Houston Astros. We've talked about it on previous podcasts, Cory, but basically the Astros have been investigated by the MLB for some time now for allegedly cheating in the 2017 and 2018 seasons. Illegally stealing signs using technology, I guess, is the best way to sum it up in a nutshell. Of course, you look at videos, and the way they were able to relay the signs was essentially bang a trash can on top of the dugout. They used all that technology, but they didn't have technology to relay the signs ultimately.
Supposedly,
yeah, allegedly. But nonetheless, the MLB came down with a fine over the winter break holiday. The Astros were fined $5 million and forfeited their first and second round picks in the 2020 and 21 drafts. General manager Jeff Linnau and field manager A.J. Hinch were suspended for the entire 2020 season, but then just about an hour later, Astros manager Jeff Crane came out and fired both of those guys, so they're no longer with the team. And then the ripple effect was that Alex Cora, who at the time was the bench coach for Houston, now the manager of the Red Sox, he was essentially fired. I know they mutually agreed to part ways, and the Mets also fired essentially Carlos Beltran, who was a key player, not only a player on that team, rather, but a key component in helping implement this scandal. So, Cory, what are your thoughts on really everything that's played out? Of course, this really does sort of speak to the integrity of the game, especially you look at 2017 and 2018 seasons. Astros winning it all in 2017 and going to the ALCS in 2018.
Yeah, it really is. I think all that we've been waiting for is waiting for what that penalty will be and kind of the full report. Saw a little bit more into kind of what went into. I think it was a 9-page report that Commissioner Manfred released. And it really, was something of high magnitude to see. Is this, we talk about scandals in sports, and this might be, the scandal that rocks the MLB, and you're looking at the beginning stages of, I think, it all coming out right now. With the penalties handed down, there's kind of been talks about if those penalties were harsh enough, if they were too harsh. I think that's a good penalty. I think you certainly could have been harsher. There's talks about how really Beltran was the only player from that 2017 Astros team that was named in the report. No other players were named, and I think essentially what they said is since if the players were to come forward and be helpful in the interviews, they'd be granted immunity in a sense. That seems like what happened, but I think that's kind of my biggest complaint, I think, is that these players are really getting off with no punishment at all. They've really can just cruise into next season, continue playing the game. They will still have their World Series championship that Manfred said today. He's not taking away any titles or anything like that from the 2017 Astros and 2018 Red Sox. So that's my biggest complaint. Of course, there's been a whole slew of things coming out recently about whether Altuve and Bregman have been involved. I'm sure we'll get into that a little more. But overall, I think the penalties handed down are harsh enough to kind of prevent other teams from going down this road. But still, like I said, I think the lack of a player punishment is really my only complaint right there.
Yeah, I agree with you there. There's a lot of videos out there with Jose Altuve. Seemingly it incriminates him. There's a video, I think it was after he hit the walk-off home run in Game 6 of the ALCS this year, where as he's crossing home plate, waiting to be mobbed by his teammates, he's yelling, "Don't rip off my jersey." A lot of people took that as, well, maybe there's something underneath, which kind of incriminates him in sort of this whole scandal. I think I told you about this over text. If they ever catch Jose Altuve for any allegations involving him in this scandal, he should be banned from baseball. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree.
You look at Pete Rose, he damaged the integrity of the game by betting while he was managing. I mean, to me, this is the same stuff right here, essentially damaging the integrity of the game by relaying signs. I think the thing that shocked me the most, Corey, was the fact that this team went through so much just to cheat when they were a really good team. I mean, you look at it on paper, I mean, with guys like Altuve, Bregman, George Springer, Yuri Gurriel, I mean, this was a talented team. And the fact that they went through this much to cheat, I think, is the most just astonishing thing about really this whole situation. And, you know, I'm going to sound a little biased here because I am a Nats fan, but I think, if anything, I'm not going to say the Nats saved baseball, but I think it's definitely a good thing that they ended up winning the World Series this year because, you know, if the Astros did it in 2017 and 2018, who's to say they didn't continue to do it in 2019? And I think the fact that the Nats won the World Series, especially after the last two teams led by their managers have been framed for cheating. I don't know if frame's the right word, but, you know, have been in the spotlight for quote-unquote cheating. I think it's a big thing for baseball that the Nats were able to win in 7 games this year against Houston.
Yeah, and I think, too, looking at all of this, we have to go back to the initial report by The Athletic. Ken Rosenthal and Evan Drellich set out that kind of bombshell of an article back in November where I have it pulled up here. The title of it is called "The Astros Stole Signs Electronically in 2017, Part of a Much Broader Issue for Major League Baseball." And just how that was kind of the initial kind of launching pad for this whole investigation. And I really think it speaks to the importance of journalism in our society today, that even, you know, 2 journalists were able to bring this up. It speaks also to the importance and just how helpful it was. I think they couldn't go forward without Mike Fiers, a player speaking on the condition of, you know, on the record and not on anonymity. You know, Jessica Mendoza kind of came after him, and I think there's a lot of question marks about her comments and kind of what she was saying there, when really none of this would have been uncovered without, you know, Fiers being the whistleblower that he ended up being, and just how he was able to kind of set in motion all of this by having, you know, a guy that was in that clubhouse on the record speaking about it. Really was, like I said, the launching pad into this. So props to Ken Rosenthal and Evan Drellich and the importance of journalism for starting this whole thing. You look at where it's gone from now, and, you know, you kind of talked about it, the Altuve stuff and Bregman. I think it had come out that, you know, maybe there was buzzers under them, some kind of buzzer gate type thing, and MLB came out and said that there was no other, like, kind of on-body devices or anything like that. So it looks like that's kind of how it's looking right now. But still, just all of it, all these allegations that are thrown out there, everything that has been uncovered, it really is a drastic kind of low point for Major League Baseball. I feel like when you look at, you know, of course, there's the steroid cheating era and stuff like that. There's the Black Sox kind of betting, that whole thing back in 1919. But you look at this is right up there with them, perhaps even more. You don't even know how many teams are involved yet, really, if it was just the Astros or if this was a league-wide type thing. So, I mean, I think even one of the interesting things, too, is Alex Wood, pitcher for the Dodgers during that 2017 team. He tweeted out something basically saying, I would rather have face guys that were taking steroids than facing guys that knew what pitches I was throwing. Because, you know, if you're facing a guy taking steroids, you can at least fool him with a curveball, stuff like that. Whereas these Astros players, they knew, you know, curveballs, they're sitting curveball on 2-0 count when you'd normally be sitting fastball there because of these signs. So really just a sweeping kind of controversy here that I think will be marked in MLB history for a long time.
And I know you don't feel bad about this as a Giants fan, but the Dodgers essentially, you know, you talk about getting screwed over. I mean, They faced the 2017 Astros who cheated and the 2018 Red Sox who cheated. And you even look at, you know, I can't remember all the numbers, but I think I saw somewhere on Twitter or on TV that they broke down essentially the Dodgers numbers versus the Astros numbers in Houston, and it was like,
it was night and day.
It was night and day, and I think that in a series like that, and because I think even you would agree that Dodger team was pretty talented in a series like that. I mean, stealing signs, I think will give you an advantage there. And I think the interesting thing that actually happened, because we were talking about, before break about how this could really spread to 3 teams, because Carlos Beltran had just got hired before the break, and Cora, of course, World Series manager, A.J. Hinch, a World Series manager. We were kind of thinking, in theory, man, this could spread to 3 teams, and then it actually happened. We saw 3 different managers essentially fired from their teams, and that's kind of where I want to transition to next, is the fact that, a month before spring training, we've got essentially 3 openings that are out there for Major League Baseball, and it looks like Luis Rojas, who was a former Mets quality control coach, according to Brodie Van Wagenen, the Mets general manager, he is close to a deal with the Mets, 38 years of age. So we still have the Astros and the Red Sox that are still looking for managers. Let me go first on this, because I've got because where I wanted to go was where you thought that, who you thought these 2 teams should hire as their next manager. The 2 names I'm going to throw out there, and whether you want to hire them for the Astros or the Red Sox, Buck Showalter and Dusty Baker. The reason I would go with those 2 names is because they have experience. They both have credibility, highly accomplished managers in this game. Really, the only thing they haven't accomplished is a World Series ring. I know both you and I are familiar with Dusty Baker because he has managed both the Nationals and the Giants. He's a guy before, Davey Martinez won the World Series this year. People, Nats fans, even me, were saying, well, we're not sure Dusty Baker should have been fired because he was the only manager that, when you count Davey Johnson and Matt Williams before him, had led the Nats with this talented team to 2 consecutive playoff appearances. And we both know it's hard enough just to make the playoffs in baseball. And then you look at Buck Showalter. He's a guy who managed the Rangers before in the state of Texas. He lives in Texas in the offseason. He's been able to manage sort of high leverage situations with the Yankees, with the D-backs. I think both of those guys, Buck Showalter with the Astros, Dusty Baker with the Red Sox, would be 2 guys who I think both those teams should look at, because right now I think both of those teams need credibility and a guy with experience, especially 1 month from spring training. You're going to have to be able to rally the troops, and especially with the case of the Astros, they're not looking good for the future with the draft picks taken away, but look, I mean, even with the cheating allegations going on, I think both you and I would agree, they have enough talent to be in it next year. So what are your thoughts on the whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like the 2 names that you put out there, Showalter and Dusty Baker. And like you said there does need to be a sense of guys coming in with credibility, with guys that can kind of rally the troops, get these guys going. In terms of the Astros, I think it'll be interesting if they stay in-house or if they'll say we're abandoning this whole thing. We don't want anyone linked to this investigation at all, because a hot name that's been out there for multiple teams is Joe Espada, their hitting coach. The Giants he was, I think, one of their final 3 candidates this year, so kind of glad that we lucked out of not choosing him with that investigation that ultimately went on, because we could be without a manager right now too as well. So I think he's kind of the guy that I think is, could step in right away, but then again, I don't necessarily know what his role was, what kind of allegations are out there about him, his investigation in the whole thing. So I think, honestly, it might be best case for them to kind of go out of house, where a guy like Showalter, where a guy like Dusty Baker could come in and kind of really make some headwaves there. Luis Espada or Joe Espada, I don't know. There's just, I feel like people would look at that and say, you're really going to keep a guy around that, has been linked to this potentially. On the Mets, we talked about Luis Rojas. That's a smart move for them. I think they just needed stability and were able to bring a guy right back in that. I think I even saw Marcus Stroman tweet something out that said he was very looking forward to getting to work with him and how he always enjoyed him on the bench, stuff like that. And then the Red Sox is the interesting one. I know you had another name, that former player you want to throw out there, so I'll give you the floor to maybe spark him and put him out there a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say Jason Varitek. He's a longtime catcher for the Red Sox, won a couple World Series there. He was famously called the captain because you remember when he was playing the three captains in baseball were Derek Jeter, him, and Paul Konerko with the White Sox. He's a guy who doesn't have the experience like a Dusty Baker or a Buck Showalter, but definitely has the credibility when you talk about a guy who led two Red Sox pitching staffs throughout to a World Series and was a fan favorite. So I think Jason Varitek might be a guy they look at, especially because I don't know if stereotype's the right word, but typically I think people look at catchers and say they can be a good manager because essentially they're already a manager on the field.
Mm-hmm. And even you look at a guy like Varitek, that would kind of be in the same realm as what the Cubs did this past offseason, hiring David Ross, of course, a guy well respected by the clubhouse, former player that has always been a guy there that people look at and say that's a guy that'll be a manager one day. And I think that's always kind of been the case with Varitek, especially his time in Boston, a fan favorite, all this stuff like that, exactly like David Ross. I think that would kind of be going along those lines that the Cubs did with Ross. The Red Sox could certainly do the same with Varitek.
So it will be interesting to see what happens, of course, with this whole scandal. I mean, we never thought it would actually take place where you'd see three different managers from three different organizations fired, and, of course, the Astros and Red Sox hunting for a manager a month before spring training. I'm sure a lot more is going to come out before the spring training workouts start to begin, so we will keep an eye on that as this scandal and its fallout continue to move forward.
And one thing I'd want to add, too, is that the MLB still isn't done investigating the Red Sox, kind of their sign-stealing scandal from 2018. So the punishment for Alex Cora hasn't even been handed down yet. And people are saying he was sort of the mastermind of this with the Astros. Then he becomes the Red Sox manager. They have their own scandal. So I think you could be looking at, Cora having a potentially longer punishment than Hinch and Linnell had. So that'll be another interesting thing to monitor going forward, and is seeing, once that investigation is completed, what the punishment that Manfred hands down for Alex Cora.
And keep in mind, too, Red Sox are a tainted organization because you remember a couple years ago they had Applegate, which was, they were allegedly using
the Apple Watches.
Yeah, Apple Watches to steal signs from the Yankees. But we'll see what happens. Of course, a lot to follow, and it'll be interesting to see how both the Astros and Red Sox move forward. Again, it looks like the Mets will be hiring Luis Rojas, before we are through here in the next few days. But let's move on now. Let's keep things back, bring things back to the local area, Blacksburg, Virginia Tech football. Of course, big news today as the schedule was officially released. I know fans are going to be happy about the fact that UVA, for example, that is a home game. That'll be on Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend. And, of course, we'll have Penn State coming to town, James Franklin and the squad coming next year. But before we get to the schedule, Corey, I want to talk about a development that happened over break with the Virginia Tech football team, and that was head coach Justin Fuente was allegedly talking to Baylor about potentially going to take on their head coaching gig, of course, in the Big 12. And we're not 100% sure if it got to a formal offer, but certainly was an interesting case given that Fuente had just finished out hiring his staff. Of course, after that, Whit Babcock, he tweeted out essentially that he was staying, and then Whit Babcock had a interesting press conference, and we'll get to that probably in your answer. But what was your thoughts as someone who covers the team for Tech Sideline? What were your thoughts on kind of that whole situation?
At first, I really didn't believe it was true because we kind of hear it all the time now. Anytime there's a head coaching opening in the South, pretty much somewhere down Big 12 country or SEC country, Fuente's name is automatically thrown out there. It's kind of, I think Will Stewart threw the analogy of throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing if it'll stick type deal. So that's kind of what it seemed like at first, because we've even seen it earlier this year, the Arkansas job. He was rumored for that, and nothing came out of that. There's always been talks of him going to Oklahoma once Lincoln Riley goes to the NFL or something like that. So really, didn't think much of it at first, and then kind of realized this was something a little more than what it certainly seems to be at first. And from what I've heard and just the different things that I've read and looked at, is that there was a meeting between Fuente and Baylor's AD, and he basically I don't know if he was ever officially offered, but he went home that night and said he would sleep on it. And then the next day tweeted out that he was going to be a Hokie, that he would stay in Blacksburg for 2020. So I think it definitely was a hard and kind of crazy 24, 36 hours for Hokie Nation, not knowing if they were going to be in a scramble of finding a new head coach kind of at the last minute. Not necessarily at the last minute, but certainly after a lot of these big names have already been hired, a lot of coaching changes have already kind of taken suit. So there was a lot of panic, I think, from Hokie Nation, even panic within the confines of the Merriman Center, where a lot of people, from what I've heard, thought that he was going to, in fact, be gone. But Fuente comes back, and now I think really the thing that you look at is what is kind of the response from that. There's going to be those people out there that will never like Fuente. They will say, oh, how could he even do that and come back and expect to command the respect of this team and this community. There will be those people that will always like Fuente. They'll say, we're glad to have him back. And there will be those people in the middle that say, just win. And winning solves pretty much anything in this town. And that's kind of will be the challenge, I think, is winning over those middle ground supporters, winning over those people that, we don't care if you took or if you interviewed somewhere else. We just want you to be here and help us have a winning football team. All of that can go away if Fuente just leads them to, I think, a 10-plus win season and an ACC championship appearance this upcoming year. So, like I said, it was a crazy 24, 36 hours, but I think you look at the end of it for him to come back and really, sleep on it overnight. There had to be something that he likes about Blacksburg and wants to be here and knows I think he knows how good this team is that he'll have this upcoming year. Just seeing the improvements that they made this past year and having pretty much a good majority of those guys back. I think 18 of 22 starters back. So I think he knows we're going to have a good team this upcoming year, and that was a lot of the draw of coming back as well.
I will say this, though. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but in my opinion, he was crazy to turn. If they offered him the job of and we don't know for sure, I think he was crazy to turn down that job from the standpoint of he's getting offered more money. They have better facilities at Baylor. I'm not even sure that's really disputable. I mean, Baylor spent a lot of money on their facilities. Mm-hmm. And this year, Baylor was essentially a Oklahoma win away from making it to the college football playoff. I mean, I don't know of a better opportunity if you want to get more exposure, really run a program that has an opportunity to make some noise at Baylor. And keep in mind, too, I mean, Lincoln Riley's been linked to NFL jobs for the past couple of years now. Who's not to say he's going to leave soon, and then all of a sudden Baylor could end up catapulting into sort of that front runner in the Big 12. I just think from his perspective, I think he might have been a little crazy to turn the job down. But from Baylor's perspective, and we had a friend talk to us about this, no offense, but what has Fuente done to really warrant consideration from Baylor? I mean, look, he's been a solid coach from the Hokies, but let's look at it. Let's look at his track record. I mean, after his first season, he slowly regressed, it seems like. I know this year was a little bit of a bounce back after 6-6 last season, but let's be honest. I mean, Fuente just doesn't come off as the type of guy that would be a quote-unquote leading candidate to take the Baylor job. For me, I mean, like if Baylor's going to look at anybody and really any sort of these big-time college football programs, Brent Venables, the Clemson defensive coordinator, should be the number one guy on anybody's list. Best defensive coordinator of the country. He's the highest-paid college football assistant. To me, if you're any team that might even have a shot at the college football playoff, you look at Brent Venables before anybody else. I don't know what your thoughts on that, but to me, the fact that he didn't take it and that Baylor was even looking at him from both sides, it's kind of a interesting and confusing situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is no argument to be made. Baylor is definitely a better job than Virginia Tech in terms of facilities, in terms of trajectory of making a college football playoff, in terms of, I think even just being in the Big 12 right now as opposed to the ACC that's been down for a couple of years. There's no question that Baylor has, all the points that you would check off on a checklist and say this is the better job. And yeah, I think it kind of goes back to even what Babcock said in his little statement afterwards, where pretty much said people don't know how loyal Justin Fuente is, and they haven't seen how loyal he is. And he pretty much said that, he's been offered jobs before, or offered interviews before and has just single-handedly turned them down. This was the first interview that he's actually taken. So, I mean, we might not see it, I think, because of what, we see kind of from the results perspective viewpoint of Virginia Tech. But obviously a lot of these teams, they see something in Coach Fuente that teams are constantly calling him. Teams are constantly, seeing him as one of the brighter young minds in this game. Still, I don't even know what his age is. Not too old, maybe a little over
40.
Yeah. So still, a young coach from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of puzzling when you look at just a results-based standpoint that, his best team was that first year there when it was all Beamer's guys, when it was, yes, he brought in the quarterback, Gerard Evans, but kind of since then, it has been a regression in a sense. Last year was, of course, the worst case, the 6-7 team, but this year kind of got back on track a little bit, but still two losses to end the year. It doesn't sit right with a lot of Virginia Tech fans. So this 2020 season will be the biggest season for Fuente. It's kind of the make or break year with all the talent he has coming back, with just all the pieces that are in place. It'll, I think, really show, what trajectory does he have this team on? Is it, a team that can consistently compete for ACC titles, or will it be, a team that is just in the mess that is the ACC Coastal and will continually be, a 5-3 team in conference? So I think that's kind of the test going forward. Good points made there. I think, Baylor did get a good coach in Coach Aranda, the defensive coordinator from LSU. Of course, they're obviously a great unit this year, national champions. So props to them. But it will be interesting to monitor kind of going forward what this team looks like this year, especially in 2020, kind of leading up to it now with Coach Fuente.
What are your thoughts on someone who's covered the team has been to these press conferences? The fact that this press conference was very selective. You had Whit Babcock on a telephone call, and he was talking to 5 reporters that were handpicked. Now, to be fair, there are respected reporters like David Teal and Andy Bitter. But what are your thoughts on that? Why not let Fuente kind of clear the air with this press conference right now when there's no distraction really of the season? Because to me, first press conference he has, whenever that is, that's going to be the first question with what happened with Baylor. To me, you do it now, you can be as transparent as possible, let it air out, but I think, come season time, it's going to be a bit of a distraction. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I don't really have any, problem with handpicking reporters or anything like that simply because it was the athletic director. But simply from a PR perspective, Coach Fuente needs someone with a PR background telling him, you need to get out there ahead of the masses and speak to these people. You can't have someone speak on your behalf. And I think that's the biggest, kind of wound here through it all, is that's even been the major complaint from, I think, everyone that we've kind of been in contact with. We've kind of seen throughout the years is that Coach Fuente isn't a very, accessible guy, isn't a guy that, kind of brings people in and lets people see the program, where, that's the biggest fan, I think, just like the fan relations and the media relations with him. It's not the greatest, where he's a very private guy, as that's what Whit Babcock said, and he just wanted to get to work. But, with all of this going on, rumors, speculating anyway, you have to be the guy that steps up to the plate as pretty much the CEO of this program and get out there and give your explanation. Like you said, whenever that next press conference is, it will probably be in signing day in February. It's not even going to be about the signing day. The questions are going to be about Baylor, because he didn't get out there in front of the media storm, in front of, it right when it happened. That's what they always teach you in PR classes and stuff like that, is that you have to get ahead of when all these people are going to be coming after you. You got to beat them to it. So puzzling move from that part. And I think, that only worsens kind of the fan relations with him and stuff like that. So, people are kind of harsh on Fuente too, though. I know the big joke on the TSL Tech Sideline message boards and stuff like that is people are upset about him and the way he holds his water bottle in the press conference and he crinkles it and stuff like that and makes noise. So there's those people that will nitpick him for everything, but I think there is valid reason for the people that are kind of upset that he didn't even come out and speak after this.
Yeah, people, and there were a lot of comparisons to Frank Beamer when he almost left Tech's job. I think it was after like the 2000 season for UNC. I don't think it's really much of a comparison. Number one, Frank Beamer had a 99 season when he took the team to a national championship game. Of course, that hasn't happened with Fuente. And even after that, Beamer held a press conference to talk about what had happened, and Fuente did not do that. But really quickly, do you buy Babcock's explanation that Fuente didn't use this to leverage, for facilities or money for staff?
I don't think for money for staff or anything like that. I think kind of a falling out point of it is that people have realized that Virginia Tech doesn't have the facilities to compete with certain schools, and that's why Fuente would even in the first place take an interview with Baylor, because of how great their facilities are. They just got a new stadium and new, I think, like $55 million football only facility, and Virginia Tech doesn't have anything like that. So I think, I don't know if he was using that for leverage or not, or if that's just kind of a byproduct of all of this happening, is that people have kind of started to realize that, Virginia Tech can't compete facilities-wise with those schools around us that are, the Clemsons of the world, the Florida States of the world, stuff like that in the ACC even. So I think even our good friend Bill Roth, he even went on the Tim Donnelly radio show and gave a great discussion about that, a little 15-minute conversation about, even that picture that Fuente tweeted out when he said he was returning to Blacksburg, when he said, let's get to work. They're in their coach's meeting room, and there's people that don't even have a seat at the table pretty much. They're on the outside because the room isn't big enough. So even things like that, you can see in just how Virginia Tech really can't compete with those certain programs that do have those football-only facilities. They do have all these kind of things in place where they can just worry about the product on the field and not everything else going around them.
Again, a lot to think about as Virginia Tech football sort of starts to get underway. Of course, the schedule was released as well. We'll kind of get to that more a little bit further down the road as, of course, the spring game approaches.
Return of a Thursday night game, too, so like that.
For sure. And we already knew the opponents, but we just didn't know the specific dates that they were playing. And, of course, the specific times won't be until the season starts, with the exception of a few here and there. But good discussion on Virginia Tech football. Let's move on now to the NFL playoffs. We are on the cusp of Super Bowl 53 between the Chiefs and the 49ers. We'll focus more on that specific matchup next week. But, Corey, let's kind of just talk about what's gone on in this NFL playoffs. I mean, both you and I are happy, I know, because the evil empire, the Patriots, are not in the Super Bowl. Can you believe they actually made the Super Bowl 3 consecutive years in a row?
Yeah.
And it was the first time in essentially a decade that they had not made the AFC Championship game. They were, in fact, upset by the Tennessee Titans, who also beat the Baltimore Ravens, the best team in the NFL record-wise, to make it to an AFC Championship game. The Chiefs have impressed with Patrick Mahomes. He's kind of been the forgotten guy, it seemed like, in the year of Lamar Jackson, but he's getting the Chiefs back to the Super Bowl. We had the Texans and Bills, which was a great game in the first round. Packers, Seahawks, great battle between Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. So looking at it from overall perspective of the NFL playoffs, what's really stuck out to you?
I mean, I think you look at it all, the run of the Titans, that was a big one, the way they knocked out the Patriots, of course, in the wild card weekend, and the way they knocked out the Ravens, and the dominant team that they had been winning 12 straight coming into the playoffs. That's a big story, of course. I think, the story kind of along with that is the Ravens and not even winning a game in this playoffs after how dominant they were this year, the year of Lamar Jackson, like you said, but still also realizing, too, just how young he is. Joe Burrow, who will be the number 1 pick in this year's draft, is actually older than Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson already has 2 years under his belt. I think those are two big stories. You kind of mentioned Mahomes was the forgotten guy, and really the Chiefs kind of hit their stride. I think it was even after the loss that they had to the Titans, after Mahomes came back. They've kind of hit their stride after that point, and it looked like the dominant team in the AFC, and they've certainly lived up to that. And then, of course, the 49ers, just all that they've done to this point. Of course, you can even look at it, and I think as dominant as the 49ers have been, as good as they've looked, you can still make the argument that they haven't even had that hard of a stretch. They beat the Vikings who, of course, Kirk Cousins had his big win over the Saints, but I really don't trust him in the playoffs. And then they beat the Packers, who I think we can all agree wasn't your typical 13-3, I guess 14-3 of a win over the Seahawks caliber team. They were more so, I think, a 9-7, 10-6 type team. So really, they haven't been tested too much. I think both me and you agree that the Saints would have been a bigger test for the 49ers, but of course the Saints got knocked out early, so you can't control any of that, and the 49ers have just rolled through their competition. So I'm really looking forward to the Super Bowl. I guess those are kind of my big takeaways so far.
Yeah, I would say you got to give credit to the 49ers. I mean, I remember when this team was, 8-0, 9-0. I think both you and I had a conversation about whether or not they were legit on the podcast, and I think both of us, if I remember correctly, said no, it was kind of a fluke, but they're in the Super Bowl, so you got to give them credit. Like you mentioned, I don't think they were as tested as they could have been, but at the end of the day, they have to beat the teams that are in front of them. And I will say, I actually thought the Vikings had a much better shot after they had beaten the Saints, but the Niners really just stonewalled them there. So you got to give them credit. And, of course, the stonewalled the Packers for the second time this season. People forget they blew out the Packers in the regular season as well. But for me, I think it just shows how disappointed I am in both Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers, two all-time great quarterbacks who only have one Super Bowl win. Of course, both of these guys are getting up there in age. And the fact that they weren't able to get it done this postseason, I think, is pretty disappointing. Look at the Saints, by the way. I mean, 3 consecutive years that they have had a walk-off loss. You think about the Minnesota Miracle 2 years ago against the Vikings, and then, of course, against the Rams, that controversial game, and this year against the Vikings at home. And then you look at the Packers. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, he's been to 4 NFC Championship games, but has only won 1. People thought, especially after that win that they had against the Seahawks, that Aaron Rodgers could put on some sort of performance on the road, but unfortunately he's not able to get it done. And now, especially when you look at Drew Brees, who's about to turn 41, and Aaron Rodgers, who's only a few years younger than him, you really start to wonder, Corey, do you think that the window has closed or is closing on both of these guys to try to get that second Super Bowl?
Yeah, and it definitely is an interesting discussion, because I think you look at it, there is definitely a changing of guard at the quarterback position, where you have guys like Brees, you have guys like Rodgers, Brady. Of course, there's discussion of, will he return next year? Will he retire? Will he go somewhere else? Same with Phillip Rivers. Same with Ben Roethlisberger. So all these guys that have kind of been the classic quarterbacks that we've kind of grown up with, kind of the guys that we've watched their entire career pretty much
Manning retiring.
Eli Manning, yeah. These guys that are coming to the end of their career now, where they have to make decisions. Will I retire? Will I go somewhere else to win a Super Bowl? Will I be able to win a last Super Bowl with this team? And there's a lot of those guys, and it really has become now the guys like Jimmy Garoppolo, the guys like Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes that are kind of taking over this league in a sense. And like I said, the changing of guard. So I think, of course, this year will be that, where it's no longer the Tom Brady show in the Super Bowl or anything like that. It will be a new champion, where Mahomes or Garoppolo will have their first Super Bowl title. And it's definitely something to look forward to, I think. But it also is kind of a sad moment, like nostalgic-wise for us, where we realize we're getting to the end of the road for a lot of these guys that we've seen our entire career. Even a guy like Peyton Manning, who retired a few years ago, we had grown up with him. So it really is kind of getting to that point in our career, and really I think the first time in our lives where we've experienced something like that. So it'll be kind of a weird dynamic to see how that is going forward with those guys like Brees and Brady that want to win. Rodgers want to win one more title and stuff like that. So want to see how that all shakes out, the old versus the new school.
I will say, for both the Saints and the Packers, I think the window is closing, but it's not closed. And I think primarily because it's almost by default. You look at their divisions. I mean, you look at the NFC South. The Panthers are going to have a new coach. They don't even know if Cam Newton's going to be the starting quarterback. We know Jameis Winston's future is uncertain in Tampa. And then you've got the Falcons. As your brother Kyle knows, they've been an inconsistent team since they made it to the Super Bowl. And then you look at the NFC North with the Packers and their division rivals. We know the Lions are a hot mess. We know the Vikings are inconsistent with Kirk Cousins, and we know the Bears are not going to win with Mitch Trubisky, rather. So I just think by default those teams are probably still the best teams in their division. But I do think that the window is closing, especially for a guy like Drew Brees. I think next year might honestly be his swan song. I mean, one final chance to win the Super Bowl. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with those guys. I do want to talk about Tom Brady, a guy that is contemplating his future. He has said emphatically that he will not retire, but it's unclear whether or not he will return to the Patriots. Of course, they got bounced out by the Titans in a game that, I mean, look, you got to give the Titans credit, but let's not act like they, blew the Patriots out of the building. I mean, the Patriots were in the game, at least scoreboard-wise, up until, last few minutes. So, Corey, what's your take on the situation? Do you think Brady returns to the Patriots, or do you think there's a team out there, and do you have a specific team in mind that you think would be a good fit for him?
I don't think there's any question that Brady returns. I think people have talked about, his competitiveness and everything like that, and that he's not going to want to go out on a pick six to end his career like it was against the Titans. So the most reasonable choice, obviously, is he comes back to New England. They go and get a wide receiver in free agency, and they tool up again for another championship run. But another name, or I guess another team I should say, that I've heard kind of thrown out there is the LA Chargers, and just how it seems like they're kind of done with Phillip Rivers, that was probably his last year with the Chargers, and that they'll be looking for a new quarterback to take over their franchise. And you got to remember, a year ago, this Chargers team was 12-4 before they lost to the Patriots in the AFC divisional round. So they have the talent in place. They lost, a number of close games this year that if they flip one way or the other, they go from, I think, what are they, 4-12 or 5-11 to a 10-win team, and they have the talent in place. I think they have a better offense, I think, of weapons around the quarterback than the Patriots do, with Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler, and a guy like Keenan Allen and Williams that can go up and make plays on the outside. So you throw in a guy like Brady there that can control the system for a year or two, and Chargers would certainly be an interesting team to look at.
Yeah, I think the best place for him to go would be the Patriots. If you're talking about strictly winning a Super Bowl, you look at the first-class organization the Patriots are. Again, you look at their division. We've talked about how weak their division is. I know the Bills had a good year, but I need to see it in multiple years from the Bills before I'm ready to crown them as a legit threat to the Patriots in the division. We know the Jets are, they went 7-9, but let's be honest, they're the Jets. I think they are going to have to show that they can still keep making strides. And we know the Dolphins, although they beat the Patriots in the last week of the season, they're nowhere close to really being a contender. And I agree with you. I think the Chargers are an interesting situation, although I will say, does he really want to play Pat Mahomes twice a year? I think that'd be interesting to see. I got a hot take potentially for you.
Don't tell me it's the Redskins.
Well, I'm not going to say. I did say the Redskins before, during the holidays, but I'm going to go with the Tennessee Titans, the team that just knocked him out of the playoffs. You look at that team; he's got familiarity. His former teammate Mike Vrabel is the head coach, and you think about it, he's never had, or at least not recently, had a running back like Derrick Henry at his disposal. And the Titans are solid defensively. Now the receivers, I think, would be a little bit of a question, but I mean, let's be honest. Are you trying to tell me that Tom Brady, although he's going to be 42, 43 years old, that he could at least not be what Ryan Tannehill was, at least in this postseason run? I mean, I think I'm willing to take a chance, and I think it's no question that Brady at his age is better than Peyton Manning was in his last year, with the Broncos. We all know how much of a shell of himself he was, but keep in mind he had the football acumen, the football IQ to help lead the Broncos to the Super Bowl. You look at the Titans, I think with their salary cap, they have to pay Derrick Henry after next season. Mm-hmm. This might be like a 1-year type of thing. I'd say why not throw some money at Brady, see if he can't, lead you to a potential run. And again, you look at that division, we know the Texans have been inconsistent. The Jaguars just hired Jay Gruden as their offensive coordinator. Give me a break. And then, of course, the Colts have no Andrew Luck. So I'm going to say the Tennessee Titans. I don't know what your thoughts were on that. I'm just saying, I think Brady, with his football IQ, can at least do what Ryan Tannehill did this year.
It makes sense. I definitely will not say that it's, a 0% chance that he goes there. I'll give you maybe 5 or 10%, but that would be, you'd definitely be saying that Titans are Super Bowl contenders if you throw Brady into the mix with Derrick Henry there in the absurd postseason that he had, and Vrabel looks like a up and coming coach. And speaking of him, how about that the Vrabel Belichick interaction with about 5 minutes left, where there's sort of that loophole in the game where you can commit penalties and wind down the clock, and how Belichick had found it out earlier in the year, and he's smiling and grinning on the sideline against the Jets, and Vrabel does it against his mentor, does it against Belichick, and is able to have Belichick cussing out at the ref and stuff like that. That was kind of one of my favorite moments of the postseason. So, like I said, definitely an up-and-coming coach that we think will be a piece of this league for a while in Vrabel. So it would make sense to have Brady there. I will give you that.
And I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the big news that happened for both of our NFL teams this past holiday, with the Redskins hiring Ron Rivera. No surprise there. I mean, both you and I knew that they were more than likely gonna look for a new coach, and I think even you agree probably that Ron Rivera is a good addition for the Redskins. He brings credibility to DC. But I want to get your reaction. I know you've been on the fire Jason Garrett bandwagon for a long time. You've been driving the wagon, and it finally happened. The Cowboys not only fired Jason Garrett, but they hired Mike McCarthy, former Super Bowl champion with the Packers. Was there for a long time. What's your thoughts on the whole situation? You got your wish. Jason Garrett is gone, and thankfully he's in New York now as the Giants offense coordinator.
Yeah, it was about 5 years too late, but finally got my wish. Jason Garrett is gone. No more fire Jason Garrett. Fire the Clapper tweets will be tweeted from my account. But I do like the McCarthy hire. I think it's a guy that has instant credibility, instant respect in the locker room, and really a no nonsense kind of guy, a guy that is strictly about business. He'll go in there and the guys will, he has, I think, the personality of a head coach. That's always kind of been my take on Jason Garrett, is that he doesn't have the personality of a head coach. He has more of the personality. I think he'll do fine as an offensive coordinator, because I think that's more of his personality, is, working one-on-one with a guy, like working one-on-one with Dak Prescott, or now he'll be working one-on-one with Daniel Jones. But I think him able to rally 85 guys or whatever it is, that's not his specialty. If he thinks clapping will kind of motivate the guys, that's not how it's done in the NFL. And I think Mike McCarthy brings more of that personality, more of that edge, that grit that'll be and speak to guys in the locker room, speak to this team. And the Cowboys have all the pieces in place. Have their offense that was, it's kind of crazy. They were the number one ranked offense scoring wise, and still didn't even make the playoffs this year. And they didn't have a terrible defense either. They were a mid-range defense, I think like 14th or 15th. So they have all the pieces in place. They have the guys in place, and I think this head coach was just the one thing that they were missing. And I think it is a very safe hire. I think you could have gone after a guy like Lincoln Riley, whose ceiling might have been a little higher, but his floor also would have been a lot lower. I think with McCarthy, you'll have a guy, he could consistently. I mean, even with the Packers, they went to the postseason 9 out of his 13 years there, and really by the end of it, it was just a broken marriage between him and Aaron Rodgers, and that was kind of dismantling the whole team. So they needed a fresh face in Green Bay and got that, and I think this will benefit the Cowboys as well, having a fresh face. So
I do remember saying, not to tell my own horn, that I think Mike McCarthy would be a good fit for the Cowboys. But I think it was a good move. Again, he's Super Bowl champion, like you mentioned, 9 out of 13 playoff appearances in his time in Green Bay. So he knows how to get to the playoffs. He never really had a running back like Zeke Elliott in Green Bay. So I think that's going to be interesting. Dak Prescott, I think, is going to have a good coach to work with. And I just think it was a better move over guys that were mentioned like Urban Meyer and Lincoln Riley. Again, you've got a guy like McCarthy who's got NFL experience. None of those guys have coached in the NFL, and he's also won a Super Bowl. I mean, when you put all those things together, I'm not sure that in terms of a resume, you were going to find a much better coach on the open market that had already had NFL experience. And keep in mind, too, I mean, Lincoln Riley just got blown out by LSU in the college football playoff semifinal. I'm not sure his stock was looking so good at the moment that Jerry Jones was looking for teams to coaches to hire for his team. But I think it's a good move from the Cowboys, and I would pick them right now. I mean, it's easy to say it right now, but there's no reason to me the Cowboys can't, win the NFC East next year with the talent that they have, and again, a coach that certainly brings a lot more credibility to Dallas. But a lot more to talk about with the NFL. Like I said, next week we'll go specifically more into the Super Bowl matchup. I think that's going to be a very intriguing game. I call it the Joe Montana Bowl because Joe Montana played for both those teams. But nonetheless, excited to see what goes down with the Chiefs and the Niners. That game is next week, and we will be discussing that in further detail next week. But I wanted to close the podcast with, again, going back to baseball, which we started. Corey, we just found out yesterday that Derek Jeter was elected to the Hall of Fame, 1 vote shy of being unanimous. I think he would have been the second unanimous player after Mariano Rivera and also Larry Walker, who played for the Expos. So I guess you could call him a national, just joking. But those 2 guys were elected to the Hall of Fame. Of course, you and I both grew up watching Derek Jeter. He was one of the premier stars of the game for a long time. What were your thoughts on his induction and anything about his career that really sticks out to you?
Yeah, I think I'm not. Listen, if we're going to be up in arms about Derek Jeter not getting unanimous decision, we should be even more up in arms about guys like Ted Williams, about guys like Willie Mays, who were, I think, 94 and 90, like 3% respectively. Derek Jeter, of course, is a great player over his career, but he's not at the level of those guys either that never got unanimous decision. So I think that's kind of more so of the media, social media society or world today that we kind of want to get something up in arms about anything. But of course, a great career, Mr. Clutch, the captain there in New York for so long. I think you look at him and he has those highlight plays and highlight kind of moments that'll always stand out with him. That backing up that throw against the A's in 2001, I want to say it was, or 2000, somewhere around there, where he flips it back and they get the guy out at home, diving into the stands. The 3,000th hit was a home run. His last game in Yankee Stadium, the walk-off hits, all those kind of little moments that will stand out in my memory, and just how he was, the guy in New York all those years. It was Derek Jeter.
And then even more so off the field. I mean, there was not one hit in a scandal.
Yeah.
Especially you think about starting shortstop for the New York Yankees in the capital, the media capital of the world. You think he would have all this baggage off the field, but he never did. And even if you hated the Yankees, even if you hated him as a Yankee, you had to respect him for the player he was on the field. I'm not even sure if he was ever ejected from a game. I mean, I tried to YouTube Derek Jeter ejection, and I couldn't find anything. And this day and age, if there's something out there, it's a pretty good chance it'll be on YouTube. So Derek Jeter just class personified. I did want to say really quickly, what were your thoughts on Barry Bonds? I know you're a big Giants fan. Of course, Barry Bonds was the player that got you into the Giants. He has, of course, not been elected to the Hall of Fame for a number of reasons. Of course, steroids and that controversy being the biggest among them. But it looked like maybe after last year that he was creeping sort of to the Hall of Fame. But what are your thoughts on him not getting inducted, and do you think it will happen in the next couple years or so?
I actually think Barry Bonds will be in the Hall of Fame one day, and I think voters are kind of getting more turned on to putting him in there, and they're kind of getting away from this aspect of, I think, the really thing they're hung up on, of course, is not anything to do with his ability, because even before steroids, he was a Hall of Fame player, and a very good Hall of Fame player at that. But they're just getting hung up on the integrity part. But I think, over these years, as Barry Bonds continues to improve his image, I think people have seen him now. He's been hitting coaches of the Marlins. He's been other places and stuff like that, where he's been much more media friendly, been a guy that's kind of changed his personality a bit. I think they'll get more kind of turned on to the idea of putting Bonds in the Hall of Fame. I even read an article by Ken Rosenthal this week where he released his Hall of Fame ballot, and he had Bonds in there, kind of explained that sort of rationale behind it, saying that, you can't take away all those accomplishments that he has, because even we don't know the full list of each and every person that took steroids during that era. So we can't, definitively say one guy we have to keep out because of that. So what does that say? We're like 60%. So, only 15% away from being in. I think that certainly can be made up over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm going to say he eventually does get in. I think, honestly, just based on default. I mean, you look at percentage-wise, he's continuing to climb up. I mean, Kurt Schilling, it seems like the guy next in line. He was at 70% this year. But then you look at even next year, the guys that are supposedly going to be on the ballot for the first time. I mean, Mark Burley, Torrey Hunter. I mean, solid players, but even in their heyday, were nowhere close to Barry Bonds. So I think eventually him and Roger Clemens, for that matter, and Curt Schilling will get in, of course, controversial figures. But again, if you're just looking at the math, the way they continue to climb up slowly but steadily on the ballot, I think they will both be in the Hall of Fame one day. Maybe next year, I think. If not next year, definitely within the next 5 years or so. But great podcast here today, Corey, to start off 2020 Season 4. We talked about a lot. MLB scandal with the Astros and the Red Sox and the Mets. You had everything that's going on with Virginia Tech football in the offseason, the NFL playoffs leading up to the Super Bowl, Baseball Hall of Fame, and, of course, we're looking forward to the Super Bowl next week, the biggest Sunday of the year, one of the biggest days of the year in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. And even college basketball is kind of getting in the full swing now with conference play kind of, 6 or 7 games in the conference play now. So a lot going on. And, even in the baseball offseason, here we are still talking about baseball for 20 to 30 minutes. So there's never an end to the sports world that goes on around us, and that even holds true here today with baseball, with the signs cheating scandal, with everything that we talked about. So looking forward to more of that as we continue on in Season 4.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, folks, on the first edition of Season 4 of Real Talk with Billy and Cory. We talked about a lot of things happening on sports today, and we look forward to what's new to talk about next week, of course, leading up to the Super Bowl. But for my podcast partner, Uncle Cornelius Michael, Corey Van Dyke, I'm Hot Take Billy Parvatam. On hand, we say so long to you for just a while. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next time. Love you 3000.